Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to run through just some of the key points to note with respect to policing of speed limits. If we could just go through to the next slide. Thanks, Stephanie. And the following one. So just to highlight the fact that road policing, good enforcement is specifically included in the global plan, which is the global plan on how to implement best practice road safety interventions. It was endorsed by all of the countries in the world through the UN General Assembly process and includes very specific recommendations with respect to both speed limits and enforcement. Next slide, thanks, Stephanie. Those recommendations included those related directly to the right speed limits, of which Alina talked earlier on. Just advance that next slide, thanks. They're listed here, so again, I won't go into this in the interest of time, but suffice to say that policing of speed limits is going to be most effective if the correct speed limits are in place, which are those recommended through the safe system approach, and they're illustrated here in this slide. Next slide, thank you. The global plan also has very specific recommendations that it's important to put in place the right laws and then enforce them. So some of the common problems that are encountered with respect to road policing, police are often wasting their time on unproductive activity. And by that I mean often they're focused on things like traffic management or regulatory offences which are not related to reducing serious crashes. We also find that police lack training and don't have a good understanding of what is important in terms of reducing speeding as part of reducing trauma rates. We find the police are often predictable, so drivers can predict where and when they'll be, and we know that if road policing is unpredictable, so drivers can't guess where police will be or when they'll be operating, they're far more likely to change their behaviour. So police need to be unpredictable in terms of what they do. We often see there's simply insufficient volumes of enforcement. So if police are not enforcing laws sufficiently often, it's not going to change driver behaviours. Offenders, so particularly those who habitually break speed limits, will change their behaviour if they believe that it's likely they'll be caught. So high volumes of enforcement are really important. Many police jurisdictions focus just on visibility. You know, while that's important, both covert, which is low visibility enforcement, and high visibility enforcement are effective when the two are combined, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We often find too that police focus on warnings. We know that warnings in road policing are not effective. We often find that police don't focus on data and risk targeting, which is also a problem. Next slide, thank you, Stephanie. So the World Health Organization are very clear on this. Strong and sustained enforcement of road safety laws when accompanied by public education. So enforcement plus the public education, public awareness have positive effects on road user behaviour and have the potential to save millions of lives. So when these two interventions are combined, they're very effective. Next slide, thanks. Just to highlight this, which is an editorial that appeared in the Lancet, a medical journal that many of you will have heard of. And essentially what the editor was saying is that it's very easy to do publicity campaigns But these have little effect beyond giving the impression that governments are taking the issue seriously. And if there isn't enforcement accompanied by good laws, it's simply not going to drive behaviour changes. So, in other words, it's not enough just to announce a campaign. There needs to be rigorous enforcement to actually change driver behaviour. Next slide. Thank you, Stephanie. Once again, with respect to road policing as part of the SAFE system, it's not sufficient just to do slight increases in the level of road policing. That won't change behaviour. There need to be very significant increases. So we know from the research undertaken by ZAR that high levels of road policing are required, particularly in the speed area, to change behaviour. Numerous studies highlight the same thing, and all this is quite clear that if drivers think they're going to be caught, they're more likely to change their driving behaviour and slow down. Next slide, thanks. There was a very good study undertaken in Canada which really highlights this, and just to take out two things. We know that after police stop and prosecute a driver for a traffic offence, and that if the penalty for the offence includes penalty points or demerit points on the licence, this has a very significant effect on lowering the likelihood that that driver will be involved in a fatal crash for 3 to 4 months after the enforcement action. So this really highlighted that enforcement really does change behaviour, but the effect wears off. And so it's very important that that enforcement effort is sustained over time and isn't just short-term, it's an ongoing program. Next slide, thanks. There's a very clear relationship between the level of enforcement, so we call that the dosage, to use the health analogy, and its effect on crashes. So effectively, the more enforcement, the larger the crash reduction effect. And just to illustrate this, in the table below, you can see the volumes of speed enforcement in a range of countries correlated with the number of deaths per 100,000 population. Really, this illustrates that high levels of detection of speeding offences correlates with very low numbers being killed in road crashes. And as you can see with the last country example, that very low levels of speed enforcement correlate with very high rates of death from road crashes. So to use the health analogy, like any vaccination program, high volumes of the population need to be exposed to the vaccination program or the speed enforcement program to deter the speeding behaviour. Next slide, thanks. This really highlights in this next slide that you'll see that the purple line shows what's happening to mean speeds, which is the average speed of traffic across a population, when police enforce low-level speeding. So it's not sufficient just to enforce extreme speeds. By enforcing speeds very close to the speed limit, you drive down mean speeds, which has a significant effect on reducing road trauma across the population. So very important lesson for police, don't just focus on extreme speeding, focus on any speed above a speed limit that has the greatest impact. Next slide, thanks. So in terms of the research, again, to explain what that says, the theoretical estimates of what can be achieved by enforcement inducing full compliance is we could see reductions from 40 to 50%. We never see those, because that would mean that enforcement was having a dramatic effect. Most studies show the sort of enforcement effect is around 10%. So you see about a 10% reduction in serious crashes when enforcement is operating, but some very well implemented road policing programs have demonstrated effects of between 20 and 25%. So good road policing, good enforcement does have a significant effect on reducing trauma rates. Just to highlight here, another recommendation of the global plan is dedicated road policing agencies. Those just focused on road policing tend to have the most influential effect on reducing trauma, because the agency is just focused on road crash reduction. But police, once again, they must be trained and they need to be equipped. If police don't have good quality speed detection devices, they simply won't be able to undertake this important work. Next slide, please. Another significant fact to consider is many of the police jurisdictions that certainly we're involved in trying to improve have issues with corruption. So by training police in procedural fairness, which is how to interact positively with the public, how to be polite, courteous in terms of the interaction. We know that by training police in how to interact positively has a major impact in terms of being influential when police stop and interact with road users. So it's very important, and we reinforce this, that for police to be credible, they've got to demonstrate integrity by eliminating corruption and consistently modelling safe driving behaviour themselves. Next slide, thanks. So we know that when we train police in procedural justice principles, public perceptions towards the police improve, and the police perceptions themselves of the importance of their work also improve. So again, reinforcing how important it is that police are well trained in how to interact positively. Next slide, thanks. So finishing this part off, if the police are respectful, they offer the citizen, the driver, the opportunity to provide an explanation, they're neutral in terms of their approach, and they demonstrate trust. So for example, by explaining to drivers that the reason that they're carrying out the activity is to prevent people from being killed and seriously injured, by following this process, you can see some positive results. Next slide, thanks. The most effective road policing approaches understand deterrence theory. So just very briefly, general deterrence is really the threat of road policing activity, the belief that you're likely to be caught if you offend without actually having to catch people. And specific deterrence is really about the deterrence that comes from actually catching speeding drivers. And what we know again from the research, that while seeing highly visible road policing is very effective at deterring behaviours like drink driving, seeing highly visible speed enforcement does change behaviour where the enforcement is seen, but it doesn't change behaviour after drivers pass a speed checkpoint, for example. So this is why it's very important with speed enforcement that we have visible and covert enforcement operating. So we want drivers to slow down everywhere, not just when they see high visibility enforcement. Next slide, thanks. So just summarising some of the points that are very important about making road policing effective. First one again is dosage. There needs to be sufficient levels of enforcement to mean that drivers will who habitually exceed speed limits are going to be caught. There's got to be enough of it. We know that unpredictable, regular and sustained enforcement is required to change population-based speeding behaviour. So that sustained approach is critical. A short-term campaign of a week or two or a month or two won't change behaviour. It's got to be sustained over multiple years and decades, in fact. We know that swift penalties have a major impact, so it's not just being stopped, it's being penalised, and knowing that the fines are avoidable, ensuring loopholes in systems are addressed so that if a driver receives a penalty, they are going to have to pay the fine and be subject of the other penalties that come with it. And we also know that enforcement road policing needs to be network-wide. And there's evidence again with this quote from the European Commission. Just having a small number of enforcement sites doesn't create general deterrence because it's predictable and people change their behaviour in those locations. And the effect we want is to slow drivers down everywhere across. Next slide, thank you. Also know that changing the risk of speeding is very important. If the risk of apprehension is low because there's insufficient enforcement, it actually encourages speeding behaviour. So the more people speed, the less often they are caught, the more likely they are to continue speeding. And we also know that if apprehension rates are low, it doesn't matter if you have very high extreme penalties because they won't change behaviour unless speeding drivers believe they're going to be caught. Next slide, thanks. This one is simply to highlight that our recommendation is we need both marked, visible enforcement and unmarked, non-visible enforcement is the most effective combination to change behaviour. There's some very good research showing dramatic effects by having hidden speed cameras. If people can't guess where speed enforcement is taking place, they slow down everywhere and you get these very significant crash reduction effects through that. Slide, thanks. This again highlights the fact that enforcement operates in a system and we need good laws and regulations, combinations of tiered penalties. So, for example, fines higher as drivers exceed speed limits, very important. Demerit points, which means that the driver accumulates too many offences. So, for example, 3 offences in 2 years, they have their driver licence suspended. These sorts of penalties have the most significant effects. Fines alone have an effect, but you can get a much greater level of deterrence through demerit point systems and other compounding penalties. Once again, supporting judicial systems that mean that offending drivers cannot avoid the penalty are essential. In many locations, the police are issuing the fines, people are not paying, and the fines enforcement system, it doesn't work correctly, so that is a significant problem with creating an effective road policing program. Next slide, thanks. Just being conscious of time, just to say that automated enforcement programs, so those that use mobile speed cameras, fixed speed cameras, time over
Dave, could you raise your voice a little bit? We're having trouble listening. Now we cannot hear you at all.
Dave, we can no longer hear you.
produced a guide with the Global Road Safety Facility at the World Bank. Just on that next slide, thanks, Stephanie, which shows all the things that need to be in place to get an automated enforcement program. Sorry, Stephanie, I don't know if you can hear me, but just the next slide, thanks.
You're getting a bit cut off sometimes.
Ah, okay. I will turn off the camera just in case that helps. So this is just to highlight that the speed camera guide that you can see there, we produced with the Global Road Safety Facility at the World Bank, and shows all the legislative and procedural processes that need to be in place for an effective speed camera or automated enforcement program. Next slide, thanks, Stephanie. Once again, to highlight that road policing of itself creates a behaviour change, but when the road policing program is supported by a supporting public awareness program, the two combined are what really does create that very profound impact on driving down speeding behaviour. Next slide, thanks. And just to finish off the presentation, we encourage policing agencies to use good data. So by using serious crash information, by identifying where serious crashes are occurring, by understanding when serious speed-related crashes are occurring across times and days of the week, we ensure that road policing targets the highest risk times and days of the week to maximise impact. There's another few slides, but I'm just conscious of the fact we're a little bit over time, so I'll end it there, but the presentation does show a little bit more information about how to monitor performance and some summary comments. So thanks very much, and I'll leave it there. Sorry you couldn't hear me at points.
Thank you very much, Dave. And